Our speaker tonight is Josh Johnson with the Idaho Conservation League. Josh uses his technical background in geology, experience in environmental education, and love for the outdoors to protect the very things that make Idaho a special place to live. His work portfolio includes public lands, mining, air and water quality, and efforts to clean up the Snake River. Josh earned a BA in geology at Middlebury College and an MS in geology at the University of Colorado. He also worked as an interpretive park ranger in the Tetons and a mentor naturalist at the Aspen Center for Environmental Studies prior to joining ICL's Ketchum office staff in 2017, which is the reason Josh is not here, because he's in Ketchum, and that's where he works, which we found out about. Oh, well, we can do this. His favorite hobby, skiing, has turned into an ongoing streak of skiing every month of the year. His favorite place in Idaho, Castle Peak. So thank you so much, Josh, for being here tonight. We've got, I think, 17 here live at the River House, and then you've got another 17 on Zoom. So we're glad we're making this work. Thank you, Josh.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I just shared my screen. Can I just double check with you all that you can see that all right? Okay, seeing some nods, yes?
Yes, it's good. Yes.
Great. Well, thanks again for the introduction. And yes, today I'm going to talk to you all about some of our work to clean up the Snake River in southern Idaho. And I think you'll find this to be of interest given kind of the passion that you all have for fly fishing and for rivers as a whole. And so, yeah, I'll go through a little bit of our work at ICL. And before I do that, I can just introduce ICL a little bit more for those who don't know. So Idaho Conservation League is Idaho's largest state-based conservation group. We've been around since 1973, originally founded to be a voice for conservation in the Idaho legislature, and have since expanded to a number of different campaigns, including restoring viable populations of salmon and steelhead to Idaho, the Snake River work that I'll talk to you about today, general kind of public lands protection across Idaho, and then a big campaign to make Idaho carbon neutral and work on climate change issues. So we work all over the state. As was mentioned before, I'm based in Ketchum, but most of our staff are based in our headquarters in Boise. So if we take a look at the Snake River Watershed here, and this should be, generally familiar to you all, but to kind of walk us down the picture, we got the headwaters of the Snake River coming from the Yellowstone area in Wyoming. And if we zoom in on what's the South Fork of the Snake River, where I'm sure many of you have fished before, this is a beautiful river in this part of eastern Idaho. Prior to it being affected by some of the pollution that we'll talk about. But this isn't all that far away from, Twin Falls, for example, but the river could not be more different. So as we start heading downstream, we get more and more agricultural use across the Snake River plain. So just a bit downstream from the South Fork of the Salmon, this is what the snake looks like at American Falls Reservoir. So you'll notice, a lot of agricultural fields around, and also a reservoir. So the river starts to become more frequently dammed and modified and diverted. If we keep heading downstream, at Milner Dam, this is what the Snake River looks like at Milner Dam in late summer, early fall. The water rights allow the river to basically go to zero flow at certain times of the year, and all the water is used up for agricultural purposes. So, it's hard to have a healthy river when a river looks like this for part of the year. Further downstream, closer to Ural's neck of the woods, for many of you in the Treasure Valley, we have reservoirs like CJ Strike Reservoir, and then ones further down towards Help Canyon like Oxbow and Brownlee Reservoir. And this is the picture of what we get often in these reservoirs. Basically, it's the end point for a lot of the pollution that has been accumulating throughout the whole river as it winds through southern Idaho. And the extra amount of nitrogen, phosphorus in particular, helps fuel these harmful algal outbreaks, where the water is dangerous to touch, dangerous to drink, dangerous to have your pets in, dangerous to fish in. And so these are kind of some of the issues we're working on is, all right, how do we get the Snake River to a point where it's swimmable and fishable? And we use that language because that is the language under the Clean Water Act that governs water quality federally, to have rivers restore them to swimmable and fishable condition. And right now the Snake River is impaired, mostly due to excess nutrients, especially phosphorus. So let's talk a little bit about that nutrient pollution. So the word nutrient is a bit misleading because, nutrient might convey something good, and in some degrees they are. We need nutrients to grow crops. You need nitrogen, phosphorus to grow crops. There's a few different ways you can get it. So a common source of nutrients are fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers that are produced and farmers spread out on their land, on their farm fields to grow crops. There's also animal manure is another big one in southern Idaho that we'll talk about. Animal manure contains nitrogen, phosphorus, and can be used as fertilizer as well. And then to a much lesser extent, you have leaping septic tanks or sewage, and fertilizers maybe on your lawn, stuff like that. But this is, in terms of looking at the Magic Valley, this is a report that the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality did. You can see pretty clearly that the big two sources of nitrogen and to a similar extent phosphorus, which isn't shown here, are synthetic fertilizers and livestock. So whether it's dairy cows or beef cattle or other cattle, that makes up almost 90% of the total amount of nitrogen. So, it's really the human activities on the landscape that, have been very beneficial to Idaho's economy and to kind of the agricultural way of life in southern Idaho, but it has also left a legacy of what we call nutrient pollution. So again, nutrients aren't inherently a bad thing, but you kind of need to follow these 4 R's. So there's the right source. So using the right type of nutrient in the right amount, in the right place at the right time. And typically, we most run into the issues with the right amount. So especially as we'll talk about with the number of dairy cows we have in southern Idaho, we have way more manure or fertilizer, if you will, than we do fields to put it on within a reasonable transport distance. So oftentimes you have nutrients being put in excess supply on the landscape. And then anything that is not taken up by the crops, either because it's too much or it's the wrong time of year, that can either run off into the surface water, into agricultural drains and canals, which eventually make their way into the Snake River, or they can leach into the groundwater, into the aquifer, and cause pollution issues there. So we'll talk about both of those. So this won't be a surprise to any of you living in southern Idaho, but it is dominated by agriculture. So this is a pretty common scene. You have the Snake River winding its way through the background there, agricultural canals in the foreground, just a lot of agriculture in this landscape. And it's that water source, both the Snake River and the underground aquifer, have been what made this possible. So, the term Magic Valley really stems from the fact that we can grow crops in great abundance and efficiency in a place that is otherwise an arid high desert. It's pretty remarkable. And so, this is what the vast majority of the land around the Snake River in southern Idaho looks like. And then we also have the cows. So this slide, I've just kind of focused in on the 6 counties of the Magic Valley because that's where dairy cows are most focused. So each of those red dots is a dairy, varying size, but we have somewhere on the order of 425,000 dairy cows just in the 6 counties of the Magic Valley alone. Idaho as a whole is about the 3rd or 4th highest producing dairy state in terms of the number of cows. So, dairy industry is very big in southern Idaho. And this is what it looks like out on the ground. So We've got the kind of white stalls for the cows in the dairy in the background, and then the foreground, those are rows of cow manure stacked up. Because again, it's a lot of cows produce about 120 pounds of waste every single day for each adult cow. So it's a lot of manure to deal with. Again, manure can be viewed in some ways, excuse me, as a fertilizer, but in some ways it's a waste product. It really just depends on how you use it and how much of it you have. So here's another one of these massive dairies in southern Idaho. A dairy like this could have 10,000 cows at it. And when you have that many animals concentrated in one place, it's really not cost efficient to ship all that manure to spread it out far enough. So most of it will go to surrounding fields. And that's some of the problem of the excess application. And here's a zoom in on one of those dairies. You can see those individual cows there, and then that very odd looking colored water. That's one of the wastewater lagoons at these dairies, most of which are not lined. And some of that pollution can seep into the aquifer below. So just to put a finer point on it, in the Magic Valley alone, we have 50 million pounds, give or take, of manure being produced every single day. That is a huge logistical problem for the dairies, and not being able to spread out that manure enough is a big contribution to the pollution issues that we have in our aquifer and in the Snake River. It's definitely not all on dairies. The amount of fertilizer being put on the vast acreage of agricultural fields is another big one too. Those are probably the two biggest sources. And then after that, you have smaller sources like lawn fertilizer on houses and old leaking septic tanks. But it's basically comes back to that story of, that excess nitrogen and phosphorus that's found in the manure and the fertilizer that's being put on the landscape. So here's some examples of kind of the land application of that manure. So again, for reference, the cows in the Magic Valley produce as much waste in terms of nitrogen and phosphorus as a city of 12 million people. So about 1.5 New York cities. And this photo here is a picture of one of the massive wastewater treatment plants in New York City. And say a city like city of Twin Falls or city of Boise, have sophisticated wastewater treatment plants to deal with human waste, but we don't have the same kind of treatment for agricultural waste. While the dairies and the farmers, they have nutrient management plans that govern the amount of manure or other fertilizers that go on their landscape, we still lead to excess manure and excess fertilizer across the land. So that's kind of the part related to both the surface water piece, which we talked a little bit about before, of how Snake River is high in phosphorus, but we can also talk about groundwater. And this is a big one because groundwater is where a lot of Idahoans get their drinking water from in southern Idaho. So it's really imperative that it be of good quality. So this is the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer in eastern Idaho. This is the big one. Contains about as much water as Lake Erie, but underneath underneath the surface in the basalt rock. Very productive aquifer. It can hold a lot of water, and most of that water flows out to the Snake River. So there's a strong connection between the groundwater and the surface water in this area. And then more towards the Treasure Valley, there's a corresponding smaller aquifer there that's pretty similar in terms of its importance for a source of drinking water. So this is a satellite photo from Google Earth of the Snake Plain, and you can note the dark lavas of craters of the moon that are more recent, and then kind of the sagebrush covered high plains here. And then right along the Snake River, which kind of traces the interstate boundary more or less, you can see all the green. So that's where there's been agricultural use in this area. And then in general, the groundwater recharges from the mountains, very clean, and then it makes its way to the Snake River, where it picks up kind of pollution along the way, especially closer to the Snake River. And then it comes out of these beautiful springs, places like Niagara Springs or Thousand Springs near Hagerman, and goes into the Snake River. And so even though the groundwater is cleaner than the surface water, we still have some of that same issue from the pollution we talked about earlier getting into the groundwater. And one particular pollution issue is nitrate. So that's basically from nitrogen, which is again in fertilizers and manure, infiltrating, leaching into the groundwater, which it does very readily, and then impacting the aquifer. So this is from a just released draft report from the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, where they look at all the groundwater data across the state and they identify what are called nitrate priority areas. So these are areas that have high concentrations of nitrate, which have impacts to public health. So you can see in the Boise area, there's a number of these kind of high priority areas. Also in southern Idaho, by Twin Falls, in Pocatello, you see similar high impact. So it pretty much spans across the Snake River plain of areas of high nitrate that are really affecting drinking water. And this is important because we have drinking water standards for nitrate that are based off of something called blue baby syndrome, which you might have heard of before. It's infants who are drinking water with nitrate are really susceptible to a really dangerous condition. But there's also evidence that kind of long-term ingestion of nitrate in your drinking water, even at levels below what's allowed, or that's not as bad as the human health limits, can put you at risk for certain types of cancers and things. So again, protecting people's drinking water is just kind of a fundamental thing, and that's something that we're working on here in the Snake River. So the bottom line from all that, and I didn't get too much in the technical details. I'm happy to answer questions further on it. The bottom line, the big takeaway is that the status quo here is not sustainable. The Snake River for too long has just been a working river, an industrial river, an agricultural river, when it's really a beautiful place. As you get down in those basaltic canyons, and would be a great place to fish if the water quality was better. And we know how great it is as a place for fishing and boating and other things in the upper reaches, like on the South Fork of the Salmon or the Henry's Fork, or South Fork of the Snake rather, and Henry's Fork, before this agricultural pollution. So we kind of have a sense of what the river could be, but we also have a sense of what it is right now. And again, the Snake River has really benefited the agricultural industry and the communities that rely on it in southern Idaho. But at some point there is a tipping point where if the groundwater is being contaminated, if the surface water, although it's might be improving since like the 1970s, it's still not where it needs to be. And so the real question is, how do we change that? Because at the end of the day, everyone needs clean water. The fish farming industry, for example, along the Snake River, they rely on that clean spring water to farm their Idaho trout. And so, everyone who depends on this river needs it to be clean, wants it to be clean, I think, but, it needs to get to a point where we, are taking more significant actions to clean it up. And so kind of one thing I'll finish touching on here is kind of an opportunity for the Snake River, because at ICL, for a couple of years, as we've spent time getting into this work, kind of the conclusion we came to is that the real way to clean up this river is not through necessarily stricter regulation. That could help in some ways, but most of this pollution is what we call non-point source pollution, just from fields and dairies, and it's really hard to regulate that. So going the other way, it's thinking about how could you invest money and resources to help farmers use better practices on their land, to help dairies manage their waste better, and really start to make a dent in this pollution problem. And so, there's examples elsewhere in the country of big watershed restoration projects. Probably the most analogous one is called the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative in the Great Lakes region, where they have similar problems with the algal outbreaks and too much nitrogen and phosphorus. And they've had a partnership, federal state partnership for about a decade now, with billions of dollars being spent to work to clean things up. And we think that kind of investment to some degree is needed in the Snake River. And so kind of the biggest opportunity I think in front of us is Congressman Mike Simpson's proposal called Northwestern Transition, is kind of the concept that he has introduced earlier this year, that he would like to see become legislation perhaps someday. And at its core, it's a proposal designed to save salmon and steelhead in Idaho by removing the lower four snake dams. But I think there's also a realization that the Snake River is part of that same river system. Even if there's no longer salmon up here, a healthy river up here helps healthy salmon populations downstream. And B, an attempt to kind of make the agricultural communities whole by investing in them, with the recognition that removing those dams will impact agriculture, especially over towards the Oregon border and Lewiston area. So in this proposal, this Columbia Basin Fund that is envisioned, $33.5 billion, within that, there's actually about $1.2 billion for improving water quality in the Snake River in Idaho. And so to break that down a little bit further, there's the concept of kind of watershed partnerships within the Snake River, with about $700 million of funding, that would create kind of working groups between agricultural interests, conservationists, and the tribes to improve water quality and quantity in the Snake River in southern Idaho. And so this would be, again, voluntary, but it would be incentivizing farmers and other agricultural interests to invest in practices that will reduce pollution coming off of their fields. And then also an investment in animal waste management. So again, as I mentioned a couple of times during this talk, we have a lot of cows in southern Idaho, and they produce a lot of waste and a lot of nitrogen and a lot of phosphorus. And kind of the best way to deal with that is to figure out how to use that waste in a productive way that doesn't lead to pollution problems. And so this would provide $100 million in grants to the University of Idaho for research and development of things like animal waste digesters and other processes that convert manure to value-added products, and help support some existing programs there. And then provide financial incentives for dairies to invest in these kind of technologies, which are expensive, to help reduce that nutrient pollution. So the bottom line really is, this is the kind of investment we feel like is needed to solve some of these longstanding pollution issues in the Snake River. And so we could use folks' help on this. So I can put some of these links in the chat too once I'm done. But we have some links on our website that will direct you to Mike Simpson's office and our other congressional representation, basically supporting a proposal to invest significant financial resources in cleaning up the Snake River. It's important for those legislatures to hear from all of you. And then another piece of it is for you all, I think this is especially relevant to your group, is to share your adventures with us and with others, because one thing that we've realized is that a lot of people in southern Idaho just see the Snake River for maybe what it is, an agricultural industrial river that doesn't have much else to offer. But I think for those who dug a little deeper, kind of see the potential there. I mean, there's beautiful opportunities for hiking, kayaking, paddleboarding, fishing on the Snake, and those could be even greater if we had a cleaner river. So we're asking people, or giving people the opportunity to kind of share their adventures on the Snake River, and then kind of share that with others as a way of showing people that yes, this river could be something different. It could be something better. And just really quickly before I wrap up with questions, just a quick plug. Idaho Gives is coming up starting in about a week. And so this is, a statewide program for nonprofits to help raise money for a lot of great nonprofits, and ICL is a part of that. And we have matching gifts up to $30,000. And so we would really appreciate it if you're interested to consider making a gift to ICL at that time. And then one other cool thing, we also do a couple river trips every year on some of our beautiful rivers across the state. The one we are plugging this year is on the main Salmon River, and we still have some spots open for this. And so you'll be joining our executive director, Justin Hayes, and then a licensed outfitter on the main Salmon to have a really great trip. I went on one of these trips last year on the Middle Fork with some ICL supporters, and it was a really great time. So yeah, would recommend that. And you can contact us at ICL. You can contact me if you're interested. There's also information on our website, idahoconservation.org, to learn more about that. And with that, I will happily take any questions you all might have. Thanks.
I have two questions. I know that Idaho is the fourth largest milk producing state. There's three larger ones, and that's New York, Wisconsin, and California. Have you collaborated with the other states over there on how they're cleaning up their resources in the area?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The California connection is interesting because some of the reason we have so many cows here is that dairies actually moved from California to Idaho to take advantage of essentially laxer regulations back in the 1980s and 90s. So there's some connection there. I think mostly we've actually been looking to the upper Midwest as kind of the model of how states have dealt with some of these issues. Just a lot of similarities there in their agricultural use. And so states like Minnesota and Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska. So we have looked there, and definitely is no silver bullet. I'd say that's unfortunately the main thing that we've learned is, those states are still struggling with similar problems that we have here. They do have some more coordination, I think, amongst the state agencies in terms of how to address these problems. One of the issues here in Idaho is we have all these different agencies with a different piece of the surface water and the groundwater pollution problem, but they don't always have the best coordination or overarching strategy between them all. So, we have Idaho State, the State Department of Agriculture that looks after just the dairies, and then Department of Environmental Quality collects some groundwater data and some surface water data, but and then IDWR does as well. So we have a bunch of different agencies involved, but we are kind of looking to those other states for tips and strategies for sure.
Gotcha. And then I have another question. This is, you talked that you're collaborating with the farmers and the tribes and, obviously your resource group, but how about industry such as Chobani or the cheese manufacturers? And especially they're all in that, the Magic Valley area. Have you worked with them on that?
We have, yeah. And so especially, organizations or companies like Chobani and Cliff Bar, who have come into the Twin Falls area, I think with generally a little bit more progressive view of environmental sustainability. They have been really, really great to work with. There is a kind of a loose organization called the Southern Idaho Water Quality Coalition that includes a lot of those industry partners and Idaho Dairy Association and others. And they, have started to have some good conversations about how to address some of these issues. But I think without having some of the financial resources, it's tough to make that big difference. But I think having those conversations is really important, and starting to lay that groundwork for when we can get the money. Just the recognition that yes, we do have acknowledgement of these issues, and realize that we need to work to clean them up. But it is going to take everybody. I mean, that's what we've stressed all along. I think it's we definitely don't want to kind of beat around the bush that like we know what the sources of this pollution are, from the dairy industry and from agricultural fields. But, the point isn't really to point fingers as much as it is to, just realize that there's, some shared responsibility amongst everyone here in Idaho to work on this issue and start cleaning things up.
And I'm sorry, one more question. I hate to, this is obviously interesting to me, but what is your specific goal on cleanup in 10 years? Do you plan to get nitrogen levels at a certain point? Obviously, it's acceptable right now, but what's your short and long-term goal on this?
Yeah, good question. So the long-term goal is we've defined it more broadly as to make the Snake River swimmable and fishable again. And so the technical definition of that in Clean Water Act is that basically have the Snake River, what we call delisted, from impairment. So that is going to take some time. That we're kind of, I think everyone involved is hesitant to put a date goal on it, just because there's so much phosphorus and nitrogen already baked into the system, so to speak, and sediment and things like that, that even if we shut off all sources of new nutrients to the landscape tomorrow, we'd still be dealing with some of these problems for a while. So I think we're less focused on, say, trying to get things to a very specific level in terms of nitrate or in terms of phosphorus in the river, but more just continue a kind of a steady march towards progress in improving water quality. And so that's why we focused our goal around bringing resources to bear on this issue in a way that we haven't had before. Whether that's Congressman Simpson's proposal or whether it's something else down the road, working on that level of investment.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
I think something we can do now is we can send emails to our federal legislatures and to the president's office in support of Simpson's proposal. I know I've done that. I've sent it to Simpson's office, and I don't know where his proposal's at. I don't think it's in the current infrastructure bill, but I think just showing our support for it, I think it's something that we can all easily do now.
Yeah, and thanks for that. And I just put might need to go on mute there. It was just echoing a little bit. I think it's better now. So I just put that link in the chat, and we can share that around afterwards as well, as a way to contact Congressman Simpson and others. And I can kind of give since you touched on it, give a little update there. So Simpson introduced this proposal, in early February, I think. He's welcomed feedback on it. He would, I think, eventually like it to end up in maybe that infrastructure package, but it has not drafted specific legislation yet. He's still working through with stakeholders. And to be honest, he's heard a lot of kind of pushback from kind of expected people across Idaho and other states. And I think it would be very valuable for him to hear some support on some of these things. And we, the whole proposal as a whole, I will say, it's not perfect from our perspective. There's things in there maybe we don't like, but on the whole, obviously the salmon and steelhead issue is a huge one, but even just this piece on water quality in the Snake, like that would make a really big difference. And so, yeah, we're hoping to see where it goes. I see you on Zoom. Rosie has raised her hand. If you want to go ahead, Rosie.
Yes, sir. Have you pursued any avenues through the Department of Energy? They have work for other programs that aid and assist in research methods and propositions.
Yeah, good question. I think so. One area where the Department of Energy and specifically INL could be useful in this effort has to do with what I mentioned before about managing dairy and animal manure, basically. And so INL has already done some research into what are called methane digesters, which are used a fair amount in the Midwest, but not so much in Idaho, just because there just hasn't been incentivized by the state, hasn't been adopted. But those digesters are a way to extract methane to produce energy from that waste and consolidate it in a more usable fashion than to do something with it, make it into fertilizer pellets or remove the nutrient somehow. So I think that's a promising area of research that Department of Energy could be involved with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Cool.
You have any other questions? And then I will can share my email as well. So if folks have some follow-up questions, be more than welcome to send them my way.
Well, I have a question about the algae. Is there a certain time of the year that it becomes more prevalent? Like, you know, over the summer, does it get more, the water get more stagnant and filled and then it gets worse?
Yeah, good question. So there's a few different ingredients to those harmful algal outbreaks. Number one, you need to have water that has excess amounts of nutrients, which we know that we have typically, you know, on any given year in the Snake River, we have too much nitrogen and phosphorus in the river. Second thing is water temperature and sunlight. So that typically means that, yeah, we see from midsummer into kind of September, October is probably when we see the most algal outbreaks in southern Idaho. And then the third piece is having kind of stagnant water. So we also have that in a lot of places in the Snake River because of the reservoirs. And so you're most likely to see this problem occur late summer in the reservoirs along the Snake River.
So we have a trip planned to Brownlee in kind of the end of June. And I know Brownlee is one of those places that can get the algae. So do you think in June we're probably okay?
Yeah, I think typically June would be early for some of these blooms to occur, and they don't happen, you know, every year necessarily in every place. But yeah, it tends to be later in the summer, generally speaking. But
Okay.
so fingers crossed, yeah, fingers crossed there.
Any other questions from ladies here?
Josh, can you? Oh.
So we can see what's in there.
Oh, okay, here we go. You want to write it down? Okay. We just had a request for the link that you. Yes, yeah, yep. I think so. Do what?
Do you need me to save something, Lisa? Do you want me to save and post something? The
Yeah,
link?
the ladies are asking if we can save these links that he shared with us.
Yeah, I'll do that.
We can post them or include them in the next newsletter. Or
Okay.
both.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
You're welcome. Anything else, ladies? All right. Well, Josh, thank you very much for this excellent presentation. We all learned a great deal, and we have some, yeah. All right, anything else somebody wants to add or say anything? Okay, all right, ladies, I think we are finished for our evening. Thank you, Josh.
Bye, thank you.
Good night.
Night.
You guys can hear the bats?